I'm Ralph Preston. William Lowe and I are back this week to do another roadmap. This week we're going to talk a little bit about how to use the gym, and we're calling it more brain than brawn, based on the old idiom more brawn than brains. This is kind of the reverse. It's kind of how you have to think about neuroplasticity and your recovery when you go to the gym. So William, I know you had some thoughts on this and you were going to start us off with those. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm a big advocate of this saying, more brains than brawn, because I think in recovery after stroke, I've spoken to a lot of stroke survivors. I've exchanged notes with a lot of stroke survivors in their journey. And one of the biggest misconceptions I see with stroke survivors is that some stroke survivors believe that in recovery after stroke, they can they can help their recovery by taking a gym oriented approach. In other words, an approach where they're training up the muscles rather than teaching their brain how to send a signal to turn on those muscles in the first place. And the thing with neuroplasticity and how recovery after stroke works is that it starts with your brain actually learning how to re-educate itself on how to send the signals from from the brain to actually turn on the muscles correctly in the first place. And especially in recovery after stroke, if you're taking on an approach where you're trying to train up your muscles, or a gym approach where you're trying to strengthen up your muscles without necessarily having already developed or taught your brain how to send that signal from the brain to those muscles itself, then you're more likely going to teach your brain how to get by with whatever muscles it can turn on, rather than actually teaching itself how to turn on the correct muscles to get the job done. And this is no fun, because further down the line, if you continue down this trend of trying to promote whatever movement you can by going to the gym, it can result in situations where you're using more muscles than necessary to actually perform a movement which might have only required one muscle before your stroke, or it might lead to you actually tightening up your whole body even more and making that post-stroke muscle spasticity a lot worse, because when it comes to strengthening up your muscles are naturally going to get a lot tighter, because in recovery after stroke, your brain is still juggling that muscle spasticity and doesn't know how to regulate it enough. Going to the gym and doing weight-based exercises can potentially make that worse, and it can actually put you in situations where you find that your shoulder and your arm are coming in close to your body like this and they're glued like cement, or even situations where you're trying to lift up your arm, but rather than it wanting to go forward like this, you're heaving it like a dead weight forward, because you haven't taught your brain how to send the signal to actually turn on the correct muscle to lift up your arm in the first place. But rather, you've relied on weights or relied on gym-based exercise to help you use whatever muscle you can to actually get the movement going. So what I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to recovery after stroke, the research says that neuroplasticity is how it works. And at the end of the day, neuroplasticity is basically re-educating your brain on how to send the signals, or how to strengthen those signals that has had has been weakened after your stroke, so that you can do the things which you could do before your stroke as close as possible before. And when you've had a stroke, your muscles are a lot more weaker and they fatigue out a lot more quicker. So if you take on a gym-based approach where you're using weights, you're without necessarily educating your brain how to actually send the signals from your brain to turn on those muscles correctly, then it's likely you're going to get into some trouble and have these situations where your entire body tightens up a lot more because of the muscle spasticity, or you end up in a situation where you've conditioned your brain, or you've taught your brain that it's okay to use more effort than necessary to do something which would have only required a little bit of effort before your stroke to do. So that's why I'm a big advocate of of actually re-education over actually training or strengthening your muscles in recovery after stroke. Because re-education is really where neuroplasticity happens. I can see the appeal of taking on a weight-based approach or a gym-based approach where you can do repetitions of weights to help your recovery. But especially in the early stages, if you're a stroke survivor, re-education always comes first before any gym-based exercises, because your brain has to have already learned how to send a signal to turn on and turn off muscles consistently in a very controlled and high quality manner before you can start exploring weights. And even if you do, explore light weights of anything to help strengthen up those muscles which you've gotten back after your stroke. So earlier, before we started recording, Ralph, you and we had a little bit of a discussion about this, and I know you had some ideas and some thoughts about having a gym-based approach in recovery after stroke. But I was just wondering, for the folks watching, would you like to share some of those ideas with them now?
Sure. I didn't, when I had my stroke and through most of my early recovery, I didn't really have access to a gym. There was one in town, but I wasn't a member. And so I came to the gym later in my recovery. So I didn't fall into the whole upper arm thing at the gym, because I'd pretty much healed, recovered my arm at that point. And I did it mostly with TheraBands and the door loop and attaching them to doorknobs and things like that. I did them my hand and arm and shoulder at home, but I did do go to the gym a lot, and I like going to the gym for several reasons. They have a lot of stuff you don't have at home. Do you need all kinds of, $5,000 machines? No, but they're all convenient. One of the things I did a lot at the gym was just basically ride the NuStep. It's a recumbent stepper. After you have a stroke, it's kind of hard to get aerobic exercise, and that's one way. I also took people to use the NuStep because it swivels. The seat swivels. You can get people on and off of it pretty easily who are in a wheelchair, and all four pieces work, both feet and both hands, even if their hands and feet don't work. The other thing I liked about the gym, well, my gym had a therapy pool, but that's another discussion. It also had a walking track around all of the equipment. So if it was a rainy day and you really wanted to walk, you could go to the gym. Had a basketball court, and I did a lot of work at the gym on walking. So I would walk on my heels, walk on my toes, and walk backwards on the basketball court if no one was playing. And, it's a nice, I don't know, 60, 80-foot long hard maple surface. On the outside, there are a couple of paint lines to tell you when you're going out of bounds. So when you're walking backwards, you can see them and tell that you're going straight. And if nobody's playing, it's a real nice, safe environment. And I mostly walked there when people weren't playing. One thing I did a lot of working out on was your basic stretch bar, a stretch station. Mine had a bar, and I could hang onto the bar and do all the things I did at home on the counter, high stepping and kicking and squats and heel raises and toe raises, all that kind of stuff. One thing about the gym, is if you drive to the gym and you go there, you don't tend to talk yourself out of it. If you're going to go to the gym for an hour, or if you have a gym partner, I used to go with my ex-wife, and she would do 45 minutes or an hour or whatever on a stepper or whatever she was doing. I'd find out how long her workout was, and I'd adjust mine to it. So you don't tend to like turn around and get back in the car. You're at the gym. You don't talk yourself out of the whole thing as easily as you can at home. Let's see what else. I also discovered a lot of things at the gym that I ended up getting my own of. Like I would do some basic core work on those. They have those raised platforms, padded platforms, and I'd go over there and do bridges and clamshells and planks and things like that. You could also do them on a yoga mat. They got plenty of yoga mats. I also did core work sitting on a big ball. Closer you put your feet together, the harder it gets. If you start introducing some really light weights, um, you make it more difficult because the weight shifts your weight around and you have to recover back to that center point. So, I ended up getting myself a large ball at home because I liked it. And I ended up getting myself an exercise mat. I'm pointing at it now because I keep it over there on the floor for doing planks and bridges and things. And I also was with a trainer one time and they had me step up on a BOSU ball. So I really like that for balance. I ended up getting a BOSU ball. I didn't end up getting a $5,000 NuStep because that's a little out of the budget. But my point is the gym is also a good place where you can try out some things and maybe add them to your home gym. Also, my gym had exercise physiologists, and you got one of them every 6 months. You get an hour lesson for free with one of them. And I found they were kind of knowledgeable when I used them, and they introduced me to things that I didn't know about, and I figured out how to use them or adapt them in stroke recovery. And I actually taught them back to them how I was adapting them, so they got any more stroke survivors, they could uh, have a clue as to what we're dealing with in terms of doing some exercises. For example, if they take you to the TRX ropes and which are two big loops that you do things on, and you only got one working hand, not going to work very well. So those are a number of things that I did. I got a big long list here. A number of people asked me what kinds of things I did at the gym. And I had about an hour and a half or hour and 45-minute routine. And like I said, I'd find out like what person I went to the gym with was going to do, and I'd time it accordingly. I didn't do the entire routine the entire time. So those are a number of reasons that I like the gym, and I totally agree with you on the repetitions. I didn't know anything about neuroplasticity, but I've always been one, even before the stroke, for repetitions as opposed to a lot of big heavy weights. And I did that in my recovery because I figured if I could do 50 of something, I was training my brain with lightweight, 50 with a lightweight versus 5 or 10 with a heavyweight. I was training my brain more. I was also probably able with the lightweight to do them nice and clean. I think you touched on this, William, but one thing you want to do is if you're doing anything with a weight, or well, anything for that matter, weight or no weight, and it breaks down and you're not doing them clean anymore, that's the time to stop. If you're on a machine and you got it on 50 pounds, take it to 20 pounds and see if you can do them nice and clean again. Or most of the machines work on 0 pounds, or there's a little thing like 5 pounds at the top, a little teeny one. So you could try a real lightweight and see if you can get back to good form again, because form and quality are a lot more important than the number of reps, especially if you're doing them sloppy, because we've talked about this before. When you do things sloppy or you have big weights and you're straining, you're teaching yourself either how to do it wrong or to apply way too much effort to the task. And if you want to build up your muscles, that's great. But the one thing you want to do is get control over the movement, and so that you can do them nice and clean. And then if you can, add to them. But anytime you're doing things sloppy, it's time to stop. So with that, I'll stop. I've got some more I could say about some of the machines that I found beneficial, but I'll toss it back to you for now, William.
Yeah, definitely 100%. And I agree with everything you said, Ralph, especially especially with the point where you said that with the weights, you really have to watch your form and the quality of your movement when you start exercising with your weights. I can also see why some people would think that doing more repetitions is great. But the thing with recovery after stroke is, as I mentioned earlier, your muscles are a lot more weaker after you've had your stroke. And because they're a lot more weaker, and because that signal from your brain to your muscles is not as strong as before, your muscles are also going to tire out a lot quicker. So if you're doing anything with weights, and let's say you're aiming to do 100 repetitions or 50 repetitions of a bicep curl, you might find the first 10 repetitions are great, but after the first 10 repetitions, you might find that your shoulder might actually start to go up instead of your bicep. And that's when it's time to stop, because it's likely that when you're doing these exercises, the first 10 repetitions are good because your brain can actually send that signal from itself to the muscle quite well. But after the first 10, your brain has already fried its own circuits, and after that 10 repetitions, after the first 10 good repetitions, your brain is recruiting whatever muscle it can to actually get the movement done or get the exercise done. And it doesn't know how to differentiate between whether it's doing it correct or whether it's doing it the right way. Because as long as your brain can actually see that it's doing the movement, it doesn't actually know if it's actually educating itself the correct way and how to actually send that signal, even though it's already doing it. So even though you might see that your shoulder is compensating to go up, you're actually not teaching your brain how to strengthen up your bicep. You're teaching your brain how to compensate by using your shoulder muscles to lift up your arm a lot more instead of actually isolating your bicep. And I just want to hit on this point that Ralph mentioned something about repetitions. Repetitions is really, really important. And I'm a huge advocate of this because I think that because neuroplasticity is about education, re-education, like I mentioned, you're much better off leaving your brain off on a high quality, positive note where you're giving your brain or exposing your brain to the most accurate experience of how it used to perform something before you had your stroke, rather than allowing your brain to finish off an exercise session where you're allowing your brain to get away with heaving up your shoulder to actually lift up your arm like that, instead of actually isolating your bicep and actually sending that message correctly from your brain to actually turn on your bicep muscle at the same time. So that's just one example. And I think this whole topic, more brain than brawn, it applies more so to those stroke survivors who are looking to get back more improvements in their upper limb or in their arms and their shoulders. Because when it comes to getting back your arm and your shoulder, there is a lot less room for error, and it's very easy to teach your brain to compensate too much by turning on too much on your shoulder to actually lift up your arm, compared to when you're trying to teach your brain how to strengthen up muscles when it comes to walking. When it comes to walking, I am an advocate of using a gym-based approach where you're incorporating weights, because with walking in recovery after stroke, there is a lot more room for error because the muscles generally involved in walking, they're a lot bigger, and they're a lot easier to recruit. And more often than not, your brain actually uses your non-affected leg as a reference point to actually teach your affected leg to actually walk, which is why walking actually comes back a lot quicker after your stroke, because you have to do it. So I think, but that's another topic for another time. What was I going to say? So I think when it comes to this topic of more brain than bronze, I'm an advocate of weights, and I think it's great. But I think what Ralph and I are saying here is that you can use weights, and they can be effective if you're able to have a stern eye on how you're using them in your recovery. For example, how many repetitions are you doing with the weights? Are you performing your exercises in a high quality in a controlled manner, such that you are actually allowing your brain to teach itself how to send those signals to turn on muscles correctly, like you did before your stroke? And are you eliminating any chance for your brain to compensate or cheat by using more brain power than is necessary to do something that it used to before you actually had your stroke? And I think at the end of the day, you can use weights, but adopting a whole gym-based approach towards your recovery, it can be counterproductive, because obviously, like Ralph and I mentioned, um, your brain can only do so much after you've had a stroke, and especially because you've got that muscle spasticity, you have to be very careful about what you're exposing your brain to and what you're allowing your brain to get away with. So those are pretty much the points that I want to share, which came up when you were talking, Ralph. And I'll just pass it back to you. Just wondering if you had any ideas and thoughts you want to add to that.
Yeah, well, I like I mentioned, I use a NuStep for aerobics, but I used a few machines. Um, I always thought, like walking was a good way to practice walking. Um, but I found a few of the machines useful. What did I do? I used to do one, put some padded bars across your shoulders, and you'd lean forward and push against you with basically a core exerciser, and you could feel it tightening up your core. It worked real well. So I did that, and I also did there are two machines where you sit, and you got these two padded things. One's abducting, AB, or I have a friend who's a personal trainer who calls it AB ducting, because abducting and adducting sound similar. So AB ducting or abducting is when you move out. So you got the padded things on the outside, and you spread your leg. It's something you can do at the counter, affected leg only. I did a lot of them at the counter or at the stretch bar, where you just stand there, hold on, and then lift that affected leg out to the side as much as you can. But I like the machines as well. So I'd do some abducting, abducting, then I'd go to the other one, which is adducting. I always think about it. You're moving towards your body, you're adding something. So that's where you're squeezing in with those same hip abductors. They're real important to work. Another thing I did sometimes, I'd sit on top of those big blocks that people can jump up on top of. Don't try that after a stroke. And basically spread my feet out and do hip abduction. I also did the two leg exercises where you're seated with one and you got a bar in front of your two legs, and you push out and you bend your knees and raise your legs straight out in front of you. That works the front of your thighs, which are your quads, and then the machine next to it, you lay down on your stomach, and you had a similar thing with the two, and you put them on the back of your calves, and you'd pull up, and that would work your hamstrings. And then I would go to a leg press. And I did the leg press mostly with my affected leg only, and I would put it on 20, 30, 40 pounds, something like that, and do a lot of reps. Yeah, I can do 250, 300 pounds with both feet and do 5 of them or whatever, but I didn't see any point in that in terms of helping with my walking. I had a weak affected left leg, didn't always work right in terms of didn't have smoothness throughout the range of motion. So I found that leg press was really good. Like everything on the down, a nice controlled down is always the key. So I'd put on 20 or 30 pounds, and I'd work on pushing and letting that thing down just as absolutely smoothly as I could. Whereas if I'd up the weight, it'd be jerky on the way down to begin with, and then you'd be straining to push it. So I like to do more reps, and I paid attention. You know, William, you said something earlier about your brain will just get it done. You know, not pay it won't think about like hiking your shoulder to do a bicep curl and that kind of thing. So it's really important that you do what like I was doing on that leg press. I was paying real strict attention to how that affected leg pushed up, and more importantly, how it let down smoothly. Sometimes if I started to feel like it was going to get bumpy or something, I'd stop, I'd look around. If nobody wanted to use the machine, I'd sit there for about a minute, and then I'd go back and do 10 or 20 more. But always, 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 when your form gets crappy or you're jerking or straining, it's time to stop, or just past time to stop. 1 or 2 reps past time to stop. So I mean, those are my thoughts. I mean, there's so much else you can do at the gym. You ride a recumbent bike or a stationary bike. Rowing machines are real good for lots of things, legs, core, arms. And, you know, you can grab the 2 handles. You can take your affected hand and kind of put it through the handle, and those steppers, stair climbers, lots of things, treadmills, ellipticals. I'm personally not a big fan of ellipticals. They're great for getting sweaty, but I'm not a big fan of the elliptical motion for walking. I don't walk like that. Might be great if you're cross country skiing or something, but that's a personal thing because there's nothing wrong with an elliptical machine. So the gym offers a whole bunch of opportunities, but it's up to you to make sure that you stop, you know, use things that train your brain. So you're doing more brain than brawn, and stop when your form is no longer any good. So I found the gym real useful, but you got to pay it, like all of stroke recovery. You got to pay attention to what's going on with you and your body, and adjust as you go. So, anything else you have, William, on the subject?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for all the folks watching, Ralph and I talk tonight, you can obviously see that the gym can offer some benefits in your recovery after stroke. But at the same time, as a stroke survivor, you have to be cognizant of how you're incorporating the gym in your exercise program. It is just another tool in your stroke recovery toolbox, if you will. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to 3 components or 3 points in recovery after stroke. So I think the first one is definitely focusing on neuroplasticity, or re-educating your brain on how to send those signals like you used to before you had your stroke. And Ralph covered this quite a lot, emphasizing the idea that you have to make sure that you stop when you stop having the correct form whenever you're doing exercises, any exercises, including the ones at the gym, because how you're exercising your brain and how you're performing movements and how you're conditioning your brain is essentially how you're teaching your brain how to perform movements for the rest of your life. So if you're a fan of lifting up your arm like this for the rest of your life, then by all means, lift up a 10-pound weight every time you want to lift up your arm. If you feel that your brain is compensating by using the upper shoulder to get by. But if you're a fan of doing it as close as possible to before, then you can use weights by all means, but just make sure that what Ralph and I are saying is just make sure that you keep an eye on your form, and you stop performing the exercise once you feel that you're no longer performing the exercise with the correct form as you did when you first started within the first couple of reps. I think the second point is obviously being cognizant of how much brain power you're actually using and how much effort you're actually using when you're performing your exercises. So if you're going to the gym and you're lifting up and you want to lift up a 50-pound dumbbell and you feel, because you used to before your stroke, but you feel that you can't, it might be wise to start with a lighter weight to start with and build up towards that 50-pound dumbbell, maybe like a 5-pound or 10-pound dumbbell, and then progressively go up. But make sure at the same time, obviously, keeping an eye on your correct on that form as well, and making sure you stop yourself before you see any shoulder heaving at the same time. Obviously, all of these relate to your to the upper limb, but I'm sure that some of these also apply to getting back your walking and also strengthening up some of your muscles in your leg as well. And the last thing I think is really, really crucial is obviously quality over quantity. So I'm a big advocate of doing less reps, obviously focusing on quality over quantity, because it's much better to leave your brain with a positive note where you're exposing your brain to a high quality experience of what it feels like to send a signal from your brain to turn on the particular muscle you're trying to target in a very controlled and as accurate of a manner as you used it before you had your stroke, than it is to allow your brain to get away with movements where maybe you're using more muscles than necessary to actually perform something you used to before your stroke. Because, like I said, your brain doesn't know how to differentiate between a good movement and a correct movement as long as it's getting the job done anyway. And so, if you're lifting up that dumbbell and you're starting to heave your shoulder, it might be a wise idea. I mean, like Ralph said, to pause and then maybe just take a break and then try and just do one more and then just leave it there, because it's likely that your brain has already fried circuits. If you can just leave your brain on a positive note, then you can teach it how it should move that muscle for the rest of your life, so that you can obviously have a higher quality of life in other areas, outside of that exercise itself. So those are really the main points which are really important, at least to me, when it comes to this topic of using of more brains and brawns. I can definitely see the appeal of taking on a gym-based approach where you're banging out repetitions in order to help your recovery. But I think if done incorrectly, it can actually be a little bit counterproductive, and it can do a little bit more harm than good, especially if these points aren't considered when you're a stroke survivor trying to incorporate the gym in your exercise routine.
All right. Well, I was going to basically say the same thing, kind of something similar for my closing point, because I always felt like it was a good idea to leave your brain with a good one. And that's part of the reason. Typically I knew if I set the leg press, I don't remember now, but if I was setting it on 30 pounds or 40 pounds, I knew about how many I could do because I knew how many I'd done last time. And, I pay attention all the time, but if that magic number is 20, if you get to 15, well, guess what? You might not have as good a day as you had last time. So starting with 15, you better pay attention. Maybe you'll get 22 that are good. But I also said something about when it starts falling apart, that's like a couple reps too many. So one of the things that I would try and do would be pay real strict attention leading up to it and try and stop before I got too sloppy. And part of the point of like maybe resting, I mentioned resting for 30 seconds, then going at it again, wouldn't be to try and do 20 more. It would be to try and do 5 more with real good patterning so that you could leave your brain with the proper motion memory, because that's how the brain makes the right kind of blueprints, and you teach it the right kind of movement, the kind of movement that you want to see, which is not the sloppy movement. So anything else you have, William?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing I would say is don't be afraid to keep your repetitions to a minimum. So even doing 8 to 10 repetitions of a high quality movement, which is performed as accurately as possible, like before your stroke, is can trump 100 repetitions where the first 10 repetitions are good and the last 90 repetitions are your brain just doing them out of fatigue and compensating to just get by. Because at the end of the day, at least from what I found from myself and also the clients I've coached, is that even if you do small repetitions of an exercise which provides your brain with a high quality experience of what it feels like to actually do something which you used to do before your stroke, your brain is more likely to learn from that high quality experience, and that experience is likely to have a bigger response in your brain compared to something where you're doing 100 repetitions, where by the 10th rep, your brain is maybe pumping out all cylinders to try to get the movement going and doing all sorts of compensation to get by. So that would be my final note. And it really just goes under that point of, how much brain power are you actually using to actually teach your brain how to perform movements it used to do before your stroke, which might have only required a little bit of brain power to do. And also the idea of what Ralph mentioned, stopping when you notice that your correct form is no longer staying the same, and maybe things start to become a little bit sloppy.
Okay, well, that's pretty much it. So thanks to everybody who's watching on YouTube, and we'll see you soon on another roadmap. And thank you, William, as always. Thank you for your time.
No problems.